My name is Emily, and for 3 years I was very good at a job nobody ever hired me for, making my marriage look perfect. I want you to picture the kind of life that looks good in photographs. A brick colonial on a quiet street with a wraparound porch. A husband, Mark, who held doors open in front of other people and complimented my cooking at dinner parties. A career I'd quietly let go of for now, because he said it made more sense for the household. Friends who used to text me every day, who slowly stopped because I stopped answering. From the outside, it looked like a life plenty of women would have envied. From the inside, it felt like walking across a floor I knew at any moment could open beneath me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October when my mother, Carol, decided to stop by unannounced. She did this maybe twice a year, usually with a casserole dish or a bag of tomatoes from her garden, always with that same brisk energy she'd had my whole life. The energy of a woman who raised 2 kids alone after my father died and never once acted like it was a hardship, even though I know now that it was.
I heard her knock, and my stomach dropped the way it always did when something happened that wasn't on the schedule Mark had approved in his head, even if he wasn't the one who had to answer the door.
"Emily? You home, honey?" Her voice through the door was warm, unbothered, completely unaware that she was about to walk into a version of my life I had spent months hiding from her. I opened the door in a long-sleeved shirt, even though it was 72 degrees outside. I'd gotten good at layering. I'd gotten good at a lot of things that, looking back, no one should ever have to get good at. "Mom! I wasn't expecting you." I hugged her, quick. The way you hug someone when you're managing a performance and not a moment. She stepped inside, set a grocery bag on the counter. She'd brought me soup because I'd mentioned on the phone I had a cold, and started talking about my brother's kids, about the neighbor's new fence, about nothing and everything, the way mothers do when they're just happy to be near you. I was reaching up to grab bowls from the cabinet when it happened. My sleeve slipped down my forearm as I stretched, just for a second. Just long enough. I saw her stop talking mid-sentence. I turned around, and her eyes weren't on my face anymore. They were fixed on my arm, on the deep, purple-yellow bruising that wrapped from my wrist almost to my elbow, 4 distinct marks that anyone who'd ever gripped a struggling child, or seen a police report, or simply lived 61 years on this earth would recognize immediately as fingers. I yanked my sleeve back down so fast I nearly knocked over a bowl. Emily. Just my name. Nothing else. But the way she said it, low, careful, like she was talking to someone standing near a ledge, told me she already knew. Not the details, not yet, but she knew. "It's nothing, Mom. I bumped into the—"
Don't. She said it gently, but it landed like a closed door. Don't you dare finish that sentence. I stood there in my own kitchen, 34 years old, and felt exactly the way I had at 8 years old when I broke her favorite vase and tried to hide the pieces before she got home. Except this wasn't a vase. This was 3 years of a marriage I had convinced myself I could manage my way out of eventually, on my own terms, without anyone finding out how bad it had actually gotten. My mother pulled out one of the kitchen chairs, sat down slowly, and looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not yet, but something quieter and more dangerous. The look of a woman doing math she desperately did not want to be doing. "Sit down," she said, "and tell me the truth, all of it. I want to explain something before I go further because I know how this sounds from the outside. People hear, 'My husband hurt me,' and they picture one moment, one incident, something you could point to on a calendar and say, 'That's when it started.' It's rarely that simple. It wasn't for me. It started with small things. Comments about how much I ate at dinner, phrased like jokes. Questions about who I'd been texting, phrased like curiosity. A tone in his voice when I made plans without him that made me feel guilty enough to cancel them. I told myself he was just protective, passionate, that he loved me so much it sometimes came out sideways. By year 2, the small things had grown roots. He didn't like when I worked late, so I stopped taking on extra hours until eventually there wasn't a job left to go back to.
He didn't like when my friend Rachel called, so I let those calls go to voicemail until she stopped calling at all. He controlled the joint bank account down to the dollar and asked for receipts on anything over 20. I told my mother on the phone that things were just adjusting to married life. I told myself the same thing in the mirror most mornings. The bruises started around month 8 of year 3. Not constant. Not even frequent at first, which somehow made it worse because I kept telling myself it was an aberration, a bad night, something that wouldn't happen again if I just didn't set him off. I got quiet. I got careful. I became an expert in reading a room before I'd even walked into it. His tone on the phone, the way he closed the front door, whether his shoulders were up around his ears when he came home. 2 nights before my mother showed up, he had grabbed my arm hard enough to leave the marks she'd just seen, because I'd made plans to have coffee with a woman from my old office without asking him first. I remember standing in the bathroom afterward with the door locked, running the tap so he wouldn't hear me cry, looking at the marks already starting to bloom on my skin and thinking, this is not who I am. This is not the life I chose. Except I hadn't told anyone. Not my mother. Not my brother. Not a single friend. Because most of them had drifted away by then, exactly the way he needed them to. Sitting at my kitchen table with my mother's eyes on me, all of that came up at once. 3 years of small surrenders I'd never said out loud to a living soul. He didn't mean, I started, and my mother's hand came down flat on the table, not violently, but with a force that stopped my sentence cold. Emily, listen to me very carefully. I need you to hear the words I'm about to say, because I think somewhere along the way you stopped being able to hear them from yourself. She reached across the table and took both of my hands in hers. There is no version of a man loving you that leaves marks on your arm. None. Not one. I broke. Fully. Finally. The way you break when you've been holding a structure up with your own body for so long that your arms have forgotten how to do anything else, and someone finally says, "You can put it down now. I've got it." I told her everything. The isolation. The money. The 2 years of small cruelties dressed up as love. The 3 incidents of him grabbing me hard enough to bruise, and one, months earlier, that had been worse than a bruise. A night I'd told the walking clinic doctor I'd fallen down the stairs, and she had looked at me for a long moment before writing that down. The way people do when they don't believe you, but don't know how to make you say the truth. My mother didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect a mother in this story to fall apart. She didn't. She sat very still, her jaw tightening with every sentence, her hands never letting go of mine, and when I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. I remember watching her face during that silence and feeling a fresh wave of panic, because I couldn't read it. For 34 years I'd known exactly what my mother's expressions meant. The raised eyebrow that meant, "Watch it." The soft half-smile that meant she was proud of me even when she wouldn't say so out loud. This was different. This was a version of her I'd never had to interpret before, and it scared me almost as much as the conversation itself. "How long," she finally asked, "have you known you needed to leave?" The question caught me off guard because I hadn't let myself frame it that way, not once, not even privately. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe a year, maybe longer. I kept thinking if I just got better at not upsetting him, it would go back to how it was in the beginning." And how was it in the beginning? I had to think about that too, and the honest answer unsettled me. Good, I think. Or I thought it was good. He used to text me during the day just to say he was thinking about me. He'd show up at my old office with lunch. Everyone always told me how lucky I was. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I used to believe them. My mother nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer. "That's how it works, honey. Nobody marries a monster on purpose. They marry someone charming, and the monster shows up in installments, small enough each time that you can talk yourself into staying for the next one." She squeezed my hands. "I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear it, not just nod along the way you've probably been nodding along to a lot of things for the last 3 years. None of this is because you weren't careful enough, or good enough, or patient enough. There was no version of you that could have managed his temper into disappearing, because it was never about you to begin with. It was about him. I wanted to believe her. Some small, exhausted part of me already did. But the larger part, the part that had spent 3 years building an entire internal case for staying, wasn't ready to let go that easily. What if I'm making this bigger than it is? I said quietly. What if other people go through worse and just deal with it? My mother's expression sharpened. I want you to listen to yourself for a second. You are sitting at your own kitchen table with bruises shaped like fingers on your arm, and you're asking me whether you're allowed to call that a problem. That question, right there, is exactly what 3 years with that man has done to you. It's not a question a person asks when they still trust their own judgment. And that, she said, more gently now, is exactly why you're not staying here another night to figure it out on your own. Then she stood up. My mother is 5'4". She's 61 years old. She has a bad knee from a car accident 20 years ago. And she has never in my life raised her voice at me the way you'd expect from a woman about to change the entire direction of a family's story. But when she stood up from that kitchen table, something in the room shifted. She walked to the counter, picked up her car keys from where she'd set them down when she arrived, and turned to face me. "Get your coat," she said. "You're coming home with me tonight." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't know what else to do with the sentence. Mom, I can't just leave. There's the house, there's his dinner. I have to think about how to... You don't have to think about anything except walking out that door with me in the next 15 minutes. Her voice was calm, not loud, calmer than I'd ever heard it, actually, which somehow made it more absolute than shouting could have. Tomorrow, he's going to learn exactly who he married into. But tonight, all you need to do is get your coat. I want to tell you I walked upstairs with total clarity. But that's not what happened. What happened is that every fear I'd been carrying for 3 years came rushing up at once. What if he came home while we were still packing? What if this made everything worse? What if I was overreacting and ruining my marriage over something I could still fix if I just tried harder? What if? The 4 walls I'd built my whole life inside of. My mother came upstairs with me. She didn't hover, didn't rush me in a way that felt frantic, but she also didn't leave my side. She pulled a suitcase down from the closet shelf herself when my hands started shaking too badly to reach it. "Just the essentials," she said. "Clothes, your important papers if you know where they are, medications, your laptop if it's yours and not his. Anything else we deal with later, and we deal with it with people in your corner, not alone." "He's going to be so angry," I whispered, folding a sweater with hands that wouldn't stay steady. My mother stopped what she was doing and looked at me directly. "Emily, I need you to hear this too. His anger is not your responsibility to manage anymore. It was never supposed to be your responsibility in the first place. That's not what a marriage is. That's not what love is. You have spent years managing a man's temper like it was a full-time job, and I am telling you, as your mother, that job is over as of right now." I found my important documents in a folder I'd hidden at the back of a closet. Birth certificate, social security card, a copy of our marriage license, my old resume. Things I'd apparently been quietly gathering for months without even fully admitting to myself why. I found out later that some deep, self-protective part of me had been preparing for this exact night long before I consciously let myself believe I'd ever go through with it. We were in the car in under 20 minutes, my suitcase in the trunk, my hands still shaking in my lap. As my mother backed out of the driveway, I watched my house. The brick colonial, the wraparound porch, 3 years of a life I'd built entirely around not upsetting one man, get smaller in the side mirror. "What if he calls the police and says I'm the one who left without explanation?" I said, my voice small. "What if he tells people I'm crazy?" My mother didn't take her eyes off the road, but her jaw set in a way I recognized from childhood. It was the same look she'd had the day a landlord tried to raise our rent illegally after my father died, and she'd stood in his office with 2 kids on her hip and made him back down. "Let him try," she said. "Emily, You don't know this about me yet, but you're about to. I did not raise you, and I did not survive what I survived, to watch a man erase you and call it love. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we handle this. Properly, legally, and permanently. I didn't fully understand what she meant by that yet. I would by the next afternoon. My mother's house smelled the way it always had. Coffee, and the lavender candle she kept on the mantel, and something underneath that I can only describe as safety. I hadn't stood in that kitchen in over a year, because Mark didn't like visiting her, and I'd let that excuse keep me away from my own mother without ever questioning why. She made tea I didn't drink, and sat across from me at her kitchen table, a different table than the one I'd broken at hours earlier, but somehow it felt like a continuation of the same conversation. I need to tell you something about myself, she said, because I don't think I ever have, not really. Before I married your father, I was engaged to another man, older than me by a few years. Everyone thought he was wonderful, successful, charming, the kind of man who opened doors and complimented my mother's cooking. She paused. He hit me exactly once, 3 weeks before the wedding. I called it off within the week, and half my family didn't speak to me for a year because they thought I was throwing away a good future over one bad night. I stared at her. In 34 years, this was a story I had never once heard. I tell you that, she continued, not so you'll feel sorry for me, but so you understand something. I know exactly what it costs a woman to walk away from a man everyone else thinks is a catch. I know exactly what it costs to be told you're overreacting. And I promised myself, sitting in my parents' living room at 23 years old, that if I ever had a daughter, she would never spend one single night wondering if she deserved better. So no, you are not staying in that house one more night. And you are not doing what I did, which was quietly disappear and let him tell whatever story he wanted about why. She reached for her phone. Who are you calling? I asked. My friend Diane. You remember her. She was my paralegal at the firm for 11 years before she retired, and she still consults for a family law attorney downtown. A good one, a shark when she needs to be. We are going to find out exactly what your options are tonight, so that tomorrow, when you talk to Mark, you are not walking in as a scared woman asking permission to leave. You are walking in as a woman who already knows her rights. I listened as my mother spoke with Diane for almost 40 minutes, taking notes on a legal pad she pulled from a kitchen drawer, like she'd been keeping one there for exactly this kind of night her whole life. Documentation of the bruising, photos, dated, from tonight and any I could recall from before. The name of a domestic violence advocate who could help me file a protective order if I chose to. Information about how joint accounts worked in our state, and how quickly I could open one in my name alone. Whether the house was in both our names or his, and what that meant for me either way. I sat there mostly quiet, watching my mother take charge of a crisis with the same efficient calm she'd used my whole childhood to handle flat tires, school emergencies, and a husband's sudden death when she was 39 years old, with 2 children under 10. I realized, watching her, that I had spent years thinking of myself as someone who needed protecting, and I had never once stopped to really look at the woman who'd been doing the protecting. She wasn't just my mother tonight. She was a woman who had rebuilt her own life from nothing once already, and she knew, step by step, exactly how it was done. Near midnight, she hung up the phone and looked at me. Tomorrow morning you're going to call him, she said. Not to explain yourself, to tell him where things stand, and I'm going to be sitting right next to you when you do it. For the first time since she'd knocked on my door that afternoon, I felt something other than fear settle into my chest. It wasn't confidence yet, but it was the first cousin of it. Mark called 4 times that night. I didn't answer. By 7 the next morning, he'd sent 11 texts. The first few furious, demanding to know where I was. The middle one softening into the version of him that used to show up after a bad night, apologetic, almost pleading. The last few sliding back into anger, accusing me of overreacting, of embarrassing him, of running to my mother like a child. My mother read every single one of them over my shoulder without flinching. That, she said, tapping the screen where he'd written, "You're being dramatic. Those marks weren't even that bad," is a man telling you, in writing, exactly who he is. Save that. Diane will want it. At 9 that morning, sitting at my mother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee I still couldn't bring myself to drink, I called him. My mother sat beside me, not saying a word, just present, the way a person stands next to you at the edge of something high so you know you won't fall alone. He answered on the first ring. Finally! Emily, where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. I'm at my mother's, I said. My voice shook, but it came out. I'm not coming back to the house right now. Because of a couple of bruises. Emily, come on. You know I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant, I said, and I felt my mother's hand come to rest lightly on my back, steady. I've had 3 years to learn exactly what you meant every single time. I'm not doing this over the phone. I have a lawyer. Diane had told me to say those words specifically, whether I'd formally retained her yet or not. And you're going to hear from her about how we move forward. This isn't a conversation. This is me telling you where things stand. There was a long silence on the line, and then his voice changed, the way it always used to right before it got worse. Colder. Harder. You think you can just leave? You think your mother's little pep talk changes anything? You'll be back in a week, Emily. You always come back. My mother, who had been silent the entire call, leaned toward the phone. Mark, she said, her voice even and unhurried. This is Carol. I want you to listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. My daughter is not coming back. Not this week, not next month, not ever. What you're going to do instead is contact your own attorney, because mine will be reaching out today. And you are going to learn very quickly that the woman you thought you'd isolated from her family made a mistake. She never told you her mother spent 11 years working alongside one of the best family law attorneys in this city. You didn't just marry Emily. You married into people who know exactly how this process works, who know exactly what documentation looks like, and who are not the slightest bit interested in your version of events. So tomorrow, and every day after, you are going to learn exactly who you married into. Have a good day. She ended the call. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment before something that felt almost like a laugh, disbelieving, shaky, half a sob, came out of me. Mom. I meant every word, she said simply. Diane's already drafting what we need for the protective order paperwork, in case you want to file. That's entirely your choice, and there's no wrong answer either way. She's also got a referral for a financial advisor who specializes in helping women untangle joint accounts safely, because I guarantee you he's going to try to make this hard for you financially before anything else. Over the following week, exactly what my mother predicted began to unfold. Mark's attorney sent a stiffly worded letter implying Emily had abandoned the marital home, which Diane calmly countered with photographic evidence of the bruising, time-stamped texts, and the walking clinic record from months earlier. He tried at one point to have a mutual friend reach out and convince me to just talk to him, work it out privately. My mother intercepted that call herself and made it clear, politely but unmistakably, that there would be no private conversations, only conversations through counsel. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when Mark showed up unannounced at my mother's house. The same move I'd made at his, except uninvited and furious, pounding on the door demanding to see me. My mother did not let him pass the porch. She stood in the doorway, 5'4", 61 years old, and did not move an inch. You are not welcome here, she said. If you take one more step onto this porch, I am calling the police, and given everything currently sitting in a file with my daughter's attorney, I don't think that's a call you want made. Turn around, Mark, and go home. He looked past her, trying to catch my eye where I stood frozen in the hallway behind her. And for the first time in 3 years, I watched him realize, in real time, that the version of me he'd built his control around simply wasn't standing behind that door alone anymore. Emily, come on, he said, and his voice cracked in a way I recognized. The same voice from the good mornings after the bad nights, soft and wounded, the voice that used to work on me every single time. This is insane. Your mother's turning you against me. You know I love you. For 3 years, That voice had been enough to unravel every boundary I'd tried to build. I felt the old pull of it, the muscle memory of wanting to smooth things over, to say something reassuring just to make the tension stop. But standing behind my mother on that porch, I noticed something for the first time. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw was tight, and underneath the wounded voice was the same coiled anger I'd learned to read like weather. It wasn't love standing on that porch. It had never been love. It was a man who had just realized his leverage was gone. "I heard you," I said, and my own voice surprised me, steadier than I expected, quiet, but clear enough to carry past my mother's shoulder. "I'm not confused about what happened, Mark. I don't need you to explain it to me again." Something flickered across his face. Disbelief, maybe, that I'd spoken at all. That I hadn't stayed silent and let my mother do all the talking the way I'd let him do all the talking for 3 years. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words had lost their weight. They sounded for the first time like what they actually were, a threat with nothing behind it anymore. "Go home, Mark," my mother repeated, not raising her voice, not stepping back. This conversation over. He turned around. He left. He didn't come back. I stood in that hallway for a long time after his car pulled out of the driveway, feeling something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not triumph exactly, and not relief either, though it was closer to relief than anything else. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in 3 years, the kind that reaches all the way down. Over the following weeks, the legal process continued exactly the way Diane had predicted. Mark's attorney made one more attempt at a settlement that would have left me with almost nothing from the house we'd bought together, banking, I think, on the idea that I'd be too exhausted or too afraid to fight it. My mother sat with me at Diane's office while we went through every line of the counteroffer, and when I hesitated over one particularly aggressive clause, unsure if I had the strength to push back, she reached over and tapped the paper. "You've already survived the hardest part," she said. "This is just paperwork now. Let Diane handle the paperwork. You just have to keep choosing yourself, one decision at a time." I signed nothing that didn't protect me. For the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt less like defiance and more like simply what I deserved. It's been 8 months now since I stood in my mother's kitchen and finally said the words out loud. The divorce was finalized in June, faster than I expected, partly because the evidence was clear and partly because, according to Diane, men like Mark often fold quickly once they realize the woman they married is no longer isolated enough to make a fair fight of it. I got a small apartment across town, my name on the lease, my name on every account. The first time I signed a document with just my own signature, no one else's approval required, I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward and cried for almost 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from something closer to disbelief that a life like that was allowed to be mine again. I started seeing a counselor who specializes in relationship trauma, and some weeks that work is harder than anything else in my life has ever been. I'm learning to recognize the ways 3 years of that marriage rewired how I see conflict, how I see my own voice, how long it takes me to trust that saying what I actually think won't cost me something. I'm learning, slowly, that it won't. My mother and I talk almost every day now. Not out of obligation, the way it sometimes felt in those isolated years, but because I genuinely want to hear her voice, and because I've realized I spent a long time not really knowing the woman who raised me. She told me, a few months after that first night, that watching me hide those bruises brought back exactly what it felt like to be 23 years old in her own parents' living room, being told she was overreacting. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself while I still had breath in my body, she said. Not with you. Rachel, the friend I'd let go quiet for 2 years, is back in my life. We have coffee every other week now, no phone checked, no time limit, no one waiting at home to ask who I'd been talking to. I think about that afternoon in my old kitchen sometimes. The sleeve slipping down my arm, the silence that followed. The 15 minutes it took to pack a bag and change the entire direction of my life. I used to think strength meant being able to hide the bruises well enough that no one ever had to know, that managing his moods quietly was its own kind of competence. My mother taught me, in the space of one Tuesday afternoon, that real strength was refusing to hide anymore, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't standing your ground alone. It's letting someone who loves you say, "Get your coat," and finally listening. If you're reading this and some part of it sounds familiar, the sleeves in warm weather, the friends you've quietly let drift, the way you've gotten so good at reading a room before you even walk into it, I hope you hear this the way my mother made me hear it that night. There is no version of love that requires you to disappear, and it is never too late to get your coat.